and welcome to chapter 6 of our positivity bias. And I want to share a thought that came up for me the other day. We were learning about Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, and there's towards the end of it, Yaakov passes away in Egypt, and he has Joseph promise to take his bones out, and then the brothers come to Joseph. And they've made up a story a little bit of, to try and create some shalom bias that their father wanted him to forgive them and not hold a grudge for all the things they did. And of course, Joseph knew that his father never said such a thing because his father never suspected him of keeping a judge, keeping a grudge. And of course, Joseph didn't have a grudge to keep because he saw the whole thing in a different way. He saw this as God's fulfillment of the prophecy that will go down in Egypt and will come out with great wealth, etc. But there's an interesting detail story that comes in from the Medrash. What was it that prompted? What behavior was it that prompted them to suspect that Joseph was harboring a grudge and had ill will against them, right? And the Medrash explains that when Yaakov was around, so Joseph held family meals with everyone together at the table, and as a way of honoring his father, keeping the family together and honoring his father. His father absolutely insisted that the king, Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, should sit at the head of the table, as is only fitting because of Malchus, of royalty. So Joseph would have to sit at the head of the table. Well, now that his father has passed away, Joseph has a conundrum. The conundrum for Joseph is, I don't belong at the head of the table. I have older brothers, Yehuda, Reuven. I have older brothers. I should not be sitting at the head of the table. He only did so because it was his father's rule that he has to sit at the head of the table because he is the Malchus. He's the Malchus of Medina. He's the king of the country, right? So he has to sit at the head of the table. So now that their father passed away, he can't sit at the head of the table. He doesn't feel that he has a right to sit at the head of the table. Well, not when Yehud is there and Reuven is there and others older than him. He shouldn't be there. So the easiest way out of the situation is to stop having family dinners. Then he doesn't have to have that whole conundrum.
So he didn't see the third way?
Hey, please, David.
Well, I'm just curious.
He saw this conundrum, and he couldn't bring it up for them because that would be a very difficult conversation. So instead, he didn't have the family dinners.
This is a midrash.
They took that in a negative way. They took that to mean that now that Jacob's not there, he's after them. Right? That made me to think about how many times when we were in positions of leadership, you and I, when we were in positions of leadership and we tried to do something good for our people, and it came back and slapped us. Countless times this happens, right? What is that old saying about no good goes unpunished?
No good deed goes unpunished.
How true.
So this challenge, this problem that we have, what's the source of this problem? The source of the problem is that people tend to make the worst case assumption. That's just the way where people naturally go. And that is the opposite of what we're training to do, and the opposite of what the Rebbe's example was in all these years. And this chapter comes to bring that out, right? This chapter is talking about Limud Zechus. Limud Zechus is usually referred to as finding merits, right? But it actually means to study the merits. Limud Zechus actually means judging, it's like to judge others favorably, but it means Limud is to study schusim, another person's merits. So it becomes an activity in find a good way to see this. And
Everything in this chapter is about the cup being half full.
absolutely, absolutely. And that it's an obligation to see it that way. And I think back to the story of Yosef, you know, Yosef had that limud zechus. He always had that way of viewing others. Now, there are people who look at the story of Joseph and, wait a minute, when his brothers came to town, he harassed them. And the brothers came to town and he sent them, he, made them into thieves by sending their gold back with them and setting up excuses to put them in prison and all these other things. That's one way you can see it. But that was not the case. The Medrash comes and explains to us that Yosef understood the process of teshuvah, of repentance. You can't do complete repentance without having the opportunity to make the same mistake and then not doing it. Teshuvah means to return to our true selves, to our holy self, our real being, right? And you can't fully do that unless you have another opportunity to make the same mistake and you actively choose not to do so. So everything Joseph did to his brothers was to reenact for them what had happened before so they could choose not to do it that way and complete their teshuvah for their own benefit. He wasn't seeking revenge of any kind. It's so easy to review that story as Joseph seeking revenge until they prove, completely otherwise. But it wasn't. It was completely him providing opportunities for them to really do the work that brings them home to be completely tzaddikim, completely pure again. After all the things they had done to him. He was never vengeful. He was never out to get them. It was always for their benefit. And no matter what, again, they would read it wrong. They would read it wrong. We have to learn.
They threw him into a pit and then sold him into slavery.
Say again?
I would be a little afraid. Yes, Joseph saw it as God's plan, but if I had done that, I'd be on the run.
Well, it was that bad conscience that was making him afraid.
Right. And when the Medrash explains to us that their initial concern was that Joseph was going to do like the past two generations. Avram had two sons, one took everything. Yitzchak had two sons, one took everything. They were afraid that he was going to do the same thing. And so they felt an obligation. But as soon as he was gone, all of their animosity completely dissipated. And immediately they regretted what they had done. And how much more so when they saw their father's grief, they regretted what they had done. How many times do we do something and immediately regret what we did?
Most days when I wake up, yeah.
Let's not ask for examples on that one.
Thank you.
So it's learning to see
Oh,
things.
you guys have dirty minds.
I didn't go there. How would you believe? So we have to do that limud zechus. We have to learn, and it's a skill. It's a deep skill set. It's a very challenging skill set, but we have to learn to be able to find the good, limud, to study and find the good within every situation. And this chapter is full of beautiful examples. One of the things we talks about here is the certain vice president of prominent college was known for generously volunteering his name on behalf of Jewish education, which is one of the Rebbe's deepest concerns, and raising money. And then he find out at some point that it's not working, and there's somebody who's blocking everything. So he goes to the Rebbe with this suggestion that it has been in Jewish history that the tzaddikim are able to remove someone from the picture through spiritual realms. And he was suggesting maybe this guy should be removed.
Yeah,
The Italians were good at it too.
You know, it's, by the way, you know, the day that we're recording this story is the first book of Shemos. And what happens in Shemos? We see that Moses, the very first part of the story is, right? Moses, when he has compassion for his brothers, and he sees that there's a guy, an Egyptian, who is killing and whipping a Jewish person, a Jewish slave, and he looks this way and that way, meaning it means he's looking to see if there's anyone watching, but it also means he's looking for past generations and future generations. Does this guy have any merits, right? And he sees he doesn't, and he dispatches him. Well, how does he do so? He mentions God's name, the ineffable name, in absolute purity, and the impure Egyptian can't exist in that spot. And the Talmud tells us that's how he got rid of him. He called on the sanctity, and the other couldn't. It's like when you turn on the lights and the rats start scurrying and the critters start scurrying around, right? They can't take the light, the holiness, the sanctity. So this guy was suggesting that maybe the Rebbe should, you know, and the Rebbe's answer, even if one considers another person to be 90% lacking in goodness and merit, one must nevertheless remember that he still maintains 10% of positive virtue. There is something still good, and we have to dig that up and bring that up. And what's interesting is, and we'll talk more about it in the future, but when we shine a light on the good, it tends to be self-fulfilling. It seems to bring out more. And we've seen that, for example, in educational studies, when students will rise to the expectations of their teachers, or fall, depending on the teacher, right? So when we focus on someone's positive 10%, when we focus on this thing, which is good, and we talk about that, and we bring that out to the light, it empowers it to be more influential, and other things then change for that as well. But it takes some digging. It takes some, looking in to find what is the good, right? He shares an example here of a guy in a smaller town where there's tight to get a minyan, and there's a guy who used to come in, and he'd sit down in the back of the shul and open up a newspaper, and he'd read a newspaper while the minyan is davening. And this guy was so upset that here's this Jew who would come and have the chutzpah to bring a newspaper into shul and sit down and read a newspaper while everyone's davening, right? So he was asking the Rebbe about this guy, and the Rebbe's response. What did you say? Now we do it digitally, right?
Yep.
So the Rebbe's response.
Put myself in the story,
The Rebbe's response, of course, is based on how we perceive things. Like, everyone's going to see the situation based on their life experiences, the things that are most important to them. So someone who has trouble getting to a minyan might look at the guy in a negative way. But the Rebbe's immediate response was, here's a guy who isn't ready to daven, isn't interested in the services, but he's committed to being there for his fellow Jews to make sure they have a minyan. Right? So it depends on how we perceive. It's the exact same situation. Rudy, as you were saying, who said before, Jeff, I think you mentioned it's all about the rose bushes that have thorns or thorn bushes that have roses, right?
That's right.
This is all about the cup being half full. It's how we view the exact same circumstance. We have the power to bring out the positive. We have the power to accentuate the positive. I think I've shared this story before, but I think it's worthwhile in this circumstance to share it yet again. I was teaching a fourth grade class in Worcester, Massachusetts, and there was a student in the class who had a lot of attention deficit challenges. and he was all over the place, disturbing class regularly. We had a program in the class where every kid would have a cup, like an old ice cream cup, a plastic ice cream cup, on their desk. And during class, I had a marbles, and I would put a marble in the cup whenever I caught a student being good. Whenever I catch a student doing something good, studying or responding or whatever they're supposed to be doing, following inside the siddur when they're davening, whatever it is, I would put a marble in their jar. At the end of the day, everybody would come up, and there's a large mason jar in the front of the room, and they would pour their collected marbles for the day into the jar. And when the jar is full, there would be a class party. And we'd have some food, and we'd go play some games together, and we'd have a class party. Well, there's one particular boy that was having troubles. I would try and catch him doing good. And one girl in class raised her hand, objecting, "How come you're always giving him more marbles than the rest of us?" And I said, well, and I pulled no punches. I said, well, I think he needs more encouragement than everyone else in class. Would you agree? And the class all went, yeah, duh. No one missed that, right? So I said, and by the way, what happens when the jar of marbles gets filled? Oh, the whole class gets the party, right? Okay. And then we went on with class. But then the other students started pointing out when they caught him being good, when they caught him busy at work or something, they would go, "Rabbi, Rabbi," and start pointing to him to make sure he would get more marbles.
Filled up the jar quicker.
So it was this fascinating study of them realizing that, hey, and everyone benefits if he gets more encouragement. Let's make sure he gets more encouragement. And it wasn't just with the marbles, they also changed their attitude to him to support him more. So it was a fascinating experience that I had in the classroom. But again, it comes back to, can we bring out the positive? Can we highlight the positive? Can we search for the merit and highlight that in a way that'll bring out more for everyone? And again,
did the students also think that they had the teacher manipulated?
I'm okay with that if it's for good.
Yeah, well,
I'm okay with that. If it's for good, let it be. The real measure of the teacher's effect on the class is when the teacher's out of the room.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's this idea here that's stirred by another story told by Rabbi Yeshua Moshe Stockhammer about a private yechidus he had, and a situation where there was someone who coming to Yom Kippur, right? So he says, if a Jew wakes up in the morning on Yom Kippur, and chas v'shalom, God forbid, he shaves, he eats a full meal, gets in his car, drives to the synagogue for services, all of which are direct violations of the holiest day of the calendar, and he sits there for an hour or two, those hours spent in the synagogue carry great value in and of themselves. In the first instance, in the time that he's there, he's obviously abstaining from all the other violations of the sacred day. And furthermore, during the time, he may be absorbed and internalize the sanctity of the day. And even if this does not have an immediate effect on him, it may well impact his descendants and future generations to come. Never underestimate the power of a few moments of goodness. Never underestimate the power and its impact. It reminds me, so there was a comedian, right? Shimon, I don't pronounce his last name, it's an Israeli last name, right?
Yeah.
Sigan. Shimon Sigan, a famous Israeli comedian known for his humor, but his humor was oftentimes targeted about the religious people.
Mhm.
So in a sense, he was making fun of Orthodox Jews and Jewish observance and faith in God. It was he was not known to be a friend of the Orthodox community, right? When he passed away, not long after his passing, the Rebbe veered off his conversation in his in a public Fabrengen gathering, and he quoted a Talmud Gittin, Talmud Tinius, that there were two jesters, two clowns, court jesters, who were joyous and would bring joy to others, and therefore they merited the world to come. Why did they merit the world to come? Because they were joyous and brought joy to others, and that was sufficient just to bring out joy. And he did this specifically after this person had passed away, and not in the context of the rest of the Fabrengen. So it's fascinating that the Rebbe finds a way to search for the merit and bring it out. And typically, whenever he would bring out a schus, a merit, he would attach it to some Talmudic piece, as if to give Torah validation for that person's behavior, Torah validation for that person's good, and bring it out in that way. And he got a lot of trouble. The Rebbe got a lot of trouble from others in the religious community because of this type of behavior. But obviously, he wasn't concerned about his own public image as much as the opportunity to find schus and to teach everyone to find schus, to find merits. 50 years ago, the Rebbe was the lone person in the rabbinical world focusing on finding schus of Jews, especially those who weren't within the Orthodox community. And he got a lot of flack. One of the most prominent occasions when that happened was a story you all remember in 1976. A full flight from Tel Aviv to Paris was hijacked by the PLO, landing at the Entebbe airport in Uganda. The IDF went on the 4th of July and successfully freed 102 of the 106 hostages and killed all of the terrorists. Now, in history, most of us think back on that time as a very heroic, amazing time. But in the Orthodox Jewish world, there was a lot of disdain, because how could you call a miracle something that came about through secular Jews, those who were not involved in Torah mitzvahs, and their only claim is that they were in the IDF, right? And so there's a lot of flack in that part of it. But the Rebbe focused on the positive. The Rebbe spoke publicly about the miracle that came about through the IDF soldiers who were Meiser Nefesh, who put their own lives at risk just to save another Jew. And so it's interesting how now history paints that story. It doesn't talk about all the other stories about the other people who have negative thoughts about it. It only focuses on the good side, that the Rebbe pointed out that these were soldiers who put their life at risk to help other Jews when the world stood back.
That was an assumption on the part of some of these other people that the IDF soldiers, many of them are Orthodox.
Now,
not necessarily Haredi, but they follow the religion.
Now there are. At that time, it was far more rare. It was far more rare. And I might add that part of that change came about because of the change of perspective.
Mm.
If you're thinking, go ahead.
I've heard it said that even secular Jews are secular in a very orthodox sort of way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is fascinating, the change that's come over the world, in the sense that even those who used to decry the totally secular Israel have taken on this positive bias of celebrating Jews who help protect other Jews, period. No discussion of how religious they are. Do they keep kosher? Do they not keep kosher? Do they keep Shabbat? Jews protecting Jews, that's enough merit, period. You can see back then that even the Rebbe then mentioned that those soldiers, their portion of the world to come is guaranteed. They put their lives at risk to help other Jews. Their place in the world to come is guaranteed. No one else had the audacity to speak that way about secular Jews back in that era. This is the idea of finding the merit, finding the good, highlighting that, sharing that aspect, and leaving everything else unsaid. We don't have to talk about the negative. We don't have to talk about what they don't do. If we talk about all the things that they do, whoever they are, any human being.
And I believe all the IDF soldiers that went on that Entebbe trip were volunteers. That says a lot right there.
Absolutely. But we say that easily now,
I know.
right? 50 years ago, people didn't speak so freely about the positive people. So this is definitely one of the areas where the world has been affected by this focus of constantly finding the positive. And here he gives the example of in this story called "How Low Can You Go?" Right? So there's this well-known author who had come to interview the Rebbe and wanted to get a Torah perspective on the capos in World War II in the concentration camps, who were given leadership positions and potentially use those for their own survival, but at the cost of other Jews. And they've been denigrated by everyone for their effort, for their taking advantage of their opportunities, right? And this author was trying to get some insight from the Rebbe on these things as well, the Rebbe's take on this, and the Rebbe flipped the whole thing around. How, in a situation, an untenable situation, an unwinnable situation, the fact that anyone, could manage in that role, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And now what are you going to do with it? You do the best you can, but who can in any way judge them? It's not in our place to make those kind of judgments. And it's fascinating because he used the Rebbe's knowledge of this author and some of his other works. He was able to use that and flip it around on him and say, hey, you yourself, would defend people in an untenable situation, and you wouldn't expect them to do any more. And so how could we judge here? And in a sense, it had such an impact on the author that it changed the way he writes as well. Compassion wins the day. Find a way to see the good, even in those whom you can't see it. Work harder, dig deeper. Find
Yeah,
it.
that's the only one where he had to dig, I think.
Say again?
Yeah, with the capos, I had a hard time buying off on that one, but yeah. I
Basically,
heard what you said about workers.
you can't really make that judgment unless you stood in their galoshes.
Yeah, and I thought about that. I said, I wasn't in their shoes. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
So let me bring this around to your shoes a little bit for a second, right? I just received an article from a veteran who lives up in Alaska, and he sent me an article that was written years ago about his grandfather. His grandfather had been in World War II and was downed. His plane was downed, and he removed his dog tag that had H on it for Hebrew.
Hmm.
And the article shares the story about his grandpa and another guy who didn't have time to remove the dog tag. And so the article shares the two stories, right? The one who didn't have time to remove his dog tag obviously was taken away and was never seen again. His grandfather removed his dog tag and lived with guilt for the rest of his life. We can't guilt him that he tried to survive. The Torah doesn't mandate that you to identify yourself in a situation where it's going to for sure cause you to die, or even possibly cause you to die. Torah doesn't mandate that. It doesn't expect that from someone. So how can we sit in judgment? Right? So again, Rudy, what you were talking about, if we haven't been there, we can't judge. And in this case, this gentleman who did take off his dog tag, he judged himself far more than any of us ever would. And he lived with it for the rest of his life, feeling horrible that he'd saved his life.
But at least he
Reasonable.
lived, and I hope he did some good with his life.
Well, I know his grandson, and I can tell you that
Yeah.
that's enough reason.
There you go. Yeah, you got that right.
His grandson is enough reason that he had to
There
survive.
you go. Yeah.
But again, so we look back at finding the good and finding a way to judge favorably those who've been in untenable situations, or those whom we can't seem to find any redeeming value. I remember at a Farbrengen, when the Rebbe was talking about, the Gemara talks about a shaita, a fool, an idiot. That's such an idiot that you can't have Rahmanas on them. The Torah tells you can't have pity on someone who's such an idiot. Right? And what's the Rebbe's response? Imagine the pity you have to have on somebody. The Torah says you can't even have to have pity on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine the Rahmanas you have to have on such a person. So go deeper, right? So I'll ask for your examples of where you had to dig deep, but it paid off.
Well, I don't know if that qualifies, but I dug deep enough so that some people still living.
Okay, that's I think that certainly qualifies.
Yep.
You find that someone, and I'm going
I
to use
also
an
didn't-
example.
I also didn't want to be in jail.
You use the first example first. I'm going to go with that one. But that's like
Okay.
Moshe, right?
Yep.
Moshe looked this way and that to see if there was any
Yeah.
merit for this guy by which he could salvage him. There wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? That was an Egyptian. But he did look.
Mhm.
Maybe there's a redeeming factor.
Yep. Somebody loves him, right, Judy?
Anil?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head.
You have children.
Yeah.
There have been
so
times.
Well,
Yeah.
my middle daughter's already is autistic. She's like moderate. So
Yeah.
I see stuff like that all the time, like things I would not expect her that I thought she would know or do. And I just like she's really good on the tablets and stuff. She shows me her art and stuff like that. I'm like, man, I didn't know, So that's probably be the only example. Again, my autistic daughter shows me that like all the time. You just gotta with her bad behaviors, you just gotta push it aside, dig deep, and then you'll get that gem and you're like, oh wow, that made up for hours of craziness,
So Torah wisdom teaches us that children like this have a neshama, have a soul
Yeah,
that's coming from such a lofty place
yeah.
that this world doesn't work for them.
We have one of those.
Yeah, we do.
But
Maybe
it comes
two.
from that soul comes from such a lofty place
Mm-hmm.
that it can't function in this crazy world.
Uh,
It's not them, it's this world.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes we get to see that godless, that holiness, that specialty that cuts through all the nonsense of this world. I was in a congregation B'nai Ruvain in Chicago, and there was a young boy. I'm going to say probably 6 or 7 years old. I'm guessing, and he had a passion for the Torah scrolls. So whenever the ark was getting opened up, oh, he loved it. He loved it. He was running for it, and he was all excited, right? And there were times when he would come to shul, and it wasn't time to open up the Torah, but he'd go straight to the ark and start to open it. So it was Yom Kippur. And because of my security responsibilities, I'm standing up at the front of the congregation where I can see the congregation and see the door access at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's just my post, right? But it also means I'm next to the Aron Kodesh. And the ark has been opened up for one of the High Yom Kippur prayer sessions. And I see this kid making a beeline from the back. And right as his arms are going up for the Torah, right, I put my hands in front of him. And he instinctively grabbed my fingers, right? And we just stood there for like 5 minutes until he let go of my fingers and walked away. But during that time, in my mind, I'm thinking, what does he see that I can't see?
Yeah.
What's going on for him that I'm not privy to? And I got to tell you, when he walked away and I went back to my post, I was thinking, okay, I finished Yom Kippur. I'm not getting any holier than this moment. This is as good as it gets. I'm done. He took me to a place. It was just amazing. It was just amazing. So, yeah, we don't get it. We don't understand. A lot going on.
Yeah.
Privy to. But if we can see that, if we can dig in through and see the gold, it elevates us.
But Judy, we should have lots of practice in that one.
Enough to make you gray.
That too, but age had something to do with it too. Or at least I still got my hair. I haven't tore it out yet.
Selena, you had command position. Where did you have to dig deep, and what did you bring out?
I think my command position, I think about basic training, and actually the girls in my flight taught me things.
Don't they though?
Yeah. Our TI, well, I was selected as the dorm chief. That's how I became the dorm chief. I followed all the rules, kept my mouth shut, did everything I was supposed to do, didn't volunteer, and I became the dorm chief. So, our TI suggested, I think it's time to have a GI party. I said, ooh, party. And these girls pigeonholed me and they said, you obviously don't have any military training. So let us explain to you what a GI party is. So I said, okay, that's fine. So we made a party out of it. We grabbed the sheet and the watered down wax and turned on a radio, and the floor was better than a mirror in the room. But I don't know if that answers your example.
It's taking a difficult situation and bringing out the positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, making a party out of it.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we did a great job.
Anyone else have an example to share of taking the negative, making it positive, searching, digging deep to find the good?
Sure, I could give you a couple. When you're in law enforcement, you make a lot of arrests. And so often, how should I put it? You see people start to turn to Shuva during that arrest process.
Yeah.
No, I mean they become compliant and they tell you, you know, what they did and where you can find things and you know I mean, you know, you think, man, they may be able to straighten themselves out. And then there's my military experience of taking a unit to war. And although that was a totally miserable experience, I brought everybody. So I mean, I can't think of a better cup half full than that.
Mhm.
Yeah, good example. Good example to close on.
Yeah.